From the reading assignment, somebody tell me something that they learned about doing moral philosophy. What does doing moral philosophy involve? According to Altman there. Yes, ma'am. I believe you had your hand up first.
Questioning and being confused.
Yeah, got to give some reasons for stuff, right? What else? Somebody else. What else did you learn? Yes?
Self-examination.
Yeah. Self-examination. Socrates famously wrote, "The unexamined life is not worth living." Someone else. Anything else? Yes, sir.
You gotta set aside what you already think is right and wrong, maybe.
Yeah, you got to reevaluate, right? So sometimes I say that philosophy is the systematic inquiry into and attempt to address the fundamental questions of the human existence through critical, reflective reasoning, right? Yeah, somebody else had their hand up? Yes?
Securing valid principles of conduct and values.
Yeah, it's what the aim is, right? So we really need to worry about that. Most of the theories that we're going to cover in this class, especially in the middle part of the class, we'll be dealing with those very things, right? So again, we're in a moral philosophy class or an ethics class. Basic aspect of philosophy is moral philosophy or ethics. What is of value is a basic ethical question there. Again, a little bit of this will be repeat. So from Posman, right? Also included in the lecture that you should have watched or will watch by tomorrow, he points out that, let me go back. So here's a more technical definition of philosophy. Notice it's got several parts to it. And the first one is the intellectual activity of attempting to discern and remove contradiction among non-empirical reasoned beliefs. Let me stop right there. First of all, what's an empirical claim or question? What does that mean to say it's empirical?
There's a right or wrong answer.
I'm sorry?
There's a right or wrong answer.
Not enough. 2 + 2 = 4. It's not an empirical issue, but there's a right or wrong answer to that.
I lost what I was going to say.
What does it mean for something to be empirical? Yes, sir.
It's like science, like it has evidence.
Yeah. It's observation. How many people are in a science major? Your major is an empirical discipline. It's about the scientific method. That's all based, primarily rooted around observation, hypothesis formation, and then testing of it, right? So there are empirical claims about morality. X percentage of the population thinks that abortion is sometimes permissible. That'd be an empirical question about morality. We're just counting up how many people believe something, right? Here's an empirical issue. Not about morality, just an empirical issue. My name's Chris. I'm going to abbreviate it C. It is bald. And then C has a full head of hair. Even if you don't know who Chris is, who that C stands for, what do you know? What can you know? What can you still know, even if you don't know which Chris that refers to about Chris?
Chris has like a head, I guess, to have.
Well, he has a head, but we know there's something that he can't be both of something at the same time in the same respect here. Can't be bald and have hair at the same time in the same respect, right? So even if you don't know who Chris is, you know at least one thing about Chris, right? Contradictions can't be true. That's an empirical one, so in order to figure out which one is true, what do we have to do there? You got to observe what Chris is referring to and find out, if he's got hair right now or not. So we know that this one's true based on observation. So what can we infer about this one? It must be false. Contradictions can't be true. The law of non-contradiction is a basic principle in classic logic. It says that a proposition and its negation can't both be true at the same time in the same respect. Something can't be a plane geometrical object that's a square and a plane geometrical object that's a circle, right? Those are different things. Fundamentally, different things. Get off your phone during class. Was I clear about this last time? I'm going to be a huge jerk about it. If I can put down my phone long enough to teach you, you can put down your phone long enough to get an education. Fair enough? So attempting to remove and discern contradictions among non-empirical reasoned beliefs. Let's give not only a non-empirical example, but a moral example as well. In philosophy and in logic, some means at least one. Right? That's all it means. Universal. And I'm going to say moral truths. By moral in that sentence, I mean prescriptive. Or another way of saying it is normative. It prescribes a standard of right conduct or a value, right? So norm for us, differently than in like the social sciences where that would refer to the statistical use of that term. What do most people do? Most people wear clothes when they go to college or outside in public, right? That's a norm. But here it's prescriptive. It's about what you ought to do, right? So there are some universal moral truths. There are no universal moral truths. So now what we got to do in order to figure that one out is start looking at what arguments might be relevant to the proving one of them and disproving the other. Right? So that's basically a meta-ethical question, right? So one of the basic debates that I gave as an example of a debate in moral philosophy was just a debate over moral universalism and moral relativism. Right? That's that basic debate there. So can anybody give me an example of a prescriptive claim or a normative claim, particularly if you watched the lecture video already?
I did watch the lecture video.
Do you remember the first example from Fallout? Y'all seen Fallout, the series, the TV series? Right? It's pretty good. In it, she says to the ghoul, "You can't do that." And the ghoul says, "Why not?" She says, "Because of the golden rule." What's the golden rule say?
Treat others as you did.
It's a prescriptive standard. Right? Everybody with me? Prescriptive standard.
Is
Yeah.
it one of them like reserve your right to think?
Oh, that's the Hypatia stuff. Not quite, but you're in there. She says that you don't do that. You can't do that. You can't treat me bad because of the golden rule. Right? So the golden rule is a prescriptive standard. It helps distinguish what's permissible, impermissible, and obligatory. If I don't like being randomly punched in the face by strangers, then according to the golden rule, I'm supposed to do what? Refrain from punching people in the face. It's hard, but I do it. I manage. Right? So it guides conduct. Right? Everybody with me? Other principles are like that too. Each one of the moral theories that we cover in the middle part of the class will be about a standard like that. What arguments can be given for and against it, right? So in this debate, it's a meta-ethical debate about the status of morality, not just about what is moral, but what's the status of morality. And we're asking, well, is it all relative? Does it all come down to personal opinion or cultural norms? Or are there some universal standards that apply to everybody at all times and places? Right? That's a basic debate in meta-ethics. Everybody with me so far? So the first part of the class after the logic stuff, after exam 1, which is the critical thinking stuff, we spent a few weeks on that kind of debate about the nature of morality. Is it possible to discover a moral truth? And if so, how? Or are we making this stuff up somehow or projecting it onto the world? Right? So a basic debate in meta-ethics there. There's our normative standard. Again, the golden rule, treat others as you would want them to treat you. It's prescriptive. Everybody with me? Or normative in that prescriptive sense of normative. Right? So normative ethical theory attempts to identify and defend some standard of right conduct, like the golden rule or something else, like the utility principle or something called the categorical imperative that says you act only on maxims that can be willed as a universal law, this sort of thing, right? So we can ask some philosophical questions about the golden rule. We could also ask some, how should we interpret the golden rule? Is it saying that I'm supposed to treat others as I would treat them if I'm in their shoes with my preferences or they're in their shoes with their preferences? Those are two different interpretations of the golden rule, right? So it's not exactly like most moral principles. It requires some thought and some interpretation to figure out what it really means, right? So that's a basic thing to do in moral philosophy. Then we could ask, is the golden rule universal, or is it just relative to certain like Western cultures or monotheistic religion cultures, that kind of thing? So that's a debate in meta-ethics. So doing moral philosophy is going to involve dialogue and inquiry about those sorts of things, right? Arguments, counter-arguments. That's why we do several little lessons here at the beginning on basic logic. We're going to have to worry about identifying, clarifying basic metaphysical claims about what's real, epistemological claims about what we know or don't know. Is it real knowledge or just an opinion? And then evaluative beliefs and assumptions, like when I say don't lie to people for fun, is that, again, just an expression of my personal preferences, or am I expressing something that could be objectively true in some way? Right? So we're going to have to worry about that. The aim of the class is not so much to settle moral debates as it is to develop an informed, well-reasoned position. Start to think about what sorts of things are going to be relevant considerations in moral decision-making versus other sorts of things that might not be so relevant or irrelevant. And then, of course, we talked about Rick and Morty there. So, look, there's a moral question. Is it morally wrong to sell weapons to an unethical assassin who says he'll kill anybody for any reason whatsoever? Right? Morty and Rick disagree about that. Right? So we can worry about what kinds of arguments might support one position over the other. Thinking about that very sort of thing, here's a little exercise, and we'll get more into this later, so don't worry about it a whole lot right now. But take a look at that argument. It's a very basic argument, got one premise and then a conclusion after in line 2. It says, there are no universal moral truths. Therefore, everyone ought to be tolerant of different cultures. What do y'all think of that argument?
Contradiction.
Yeah. Tell me how it's a contradiction, man.
He said there are no universal moral truth that is claiming the truth.
And this one asserts one, right? So if that's true, this can't be true. So we see one argument here. That's not going to be a very good argument, logically speaking, just because of that one principle, the law of non-contradiction. Maybe other arguments might support that conclusion better, but that argument doesn't do a good job of supporting that conclusion because that argument has a self-contradiction in it. Everybody with me? So that's what we'll be learning over the next couple of classes. What we mean by an argument, and you're going to read the article called the Chewbacca Defense. I know South Park's getting old now, but y'all familiar with South Park for the most part? Y'all know the Chewbacca Defense episode? So it's about that episode, and so one of the things you need to come away from that reading with is like, what fallacy was committed in the Chewbacca defense? What do we mean by a fallacy, right? So again, going to be introducing you to some basic terms and ideas in logic. There's some ones that you need to make sure that you have down for class, because next class I'm going to roll in with an exercise. We're going to worry about how to identify fallacies in arguments after you watch the lecture before class. So the idea of an argument. Right? Logic is just the study of good and bad forms of reasoning. Some people show up to philosophy class and think, well, everything's relative. But if everything's relative, then I'm not wrong about them being wrong. Because I'm just wrong to them. Right? So we got a self-contradiction problem there as well. So we'll have one reading on that kind of issue alone. But then the ARP article is going to introduce some basic logic. Logic is the field of study, good and bad reasoning. What do we mean by an argument? We don't mean a debate between two people. We have something more technical in mind. So make sure you're picking up on that. What kinds of questions do we have to ask about arguments in order to assess them? There are always going to be two basic questions. Are the premises true? And does the conclusion follow from them? And then, are there any errors of fact, fallacy, or self-contradiction in those arguments? And then at the end of that article, they're going to introduce some informal fallacies to you. So you need to really make sure that's like the part of the argument you really need to study the most is the fallacies that are introduced at the end. So the first part's going to give you the context for that, and then make sure you start learning those fallacies. I'm going to introduce some more fallacies in the lecture that you watch as well as in class. So we're going to add to that list. Okay? Everybody good? Right. Everybody understand what to do for next time? What kind of effort you need to be putting in order to be setting yourself up for success? I don't want your season to go the same way the Saints' season went.
Yeah. Wow.
Y'all have a good weekend. Oh, one more thing. If you're not already signed up for the emergency text alerts from LSU, I would do so before we get potentially bad weather next